So hey everyone, I'm Abhishek Gosala. Most people call me HE. So I'm here as a transfer student from India, and I just got here this semester. And the second I saw the forms open up, I knew I had to introduce Zack Kass. Now, Zack didn't start as an engineer or even a researcher. He studied history right here at Berkeley. Then he spent over a decade grinding in AI sales. Crowdflower, Figure Eight, Mixed Panel, Lilt. Started as an accountant executive, working his way up, learning how to take complex technology and put it in people's hands. Now, that journey really resonated with me personally because I'm building an AI company with no blueprint whatsoever, and he built his entire career the same way from the ground up. Now, after all these learnings that he had, he became one of the first 100 employees at OpenAI. He built the GTM strategy that turned ChatGPT into the fastest growing product in history. Now, since leaving, he's advised Coca-Cola, Morgan Stanley, the White House, and spoken to over 300,000 people across 5 continents. Today, he is an AI futurist and the author of the best-selling book, the books that we'll have hand in hand next week, The Next Renaissance, where he argues that we're not living through a tech shift, we're living through a new renaissance. Now, without a further ado, please welcome the man himself, Zack Kass.
Thanks so much, AG, and thanks to so it's so fun to be back. Thanks, Vicky, for having me, and good to see everyone. I let's see. There's a lot that I wanted to say. I'm very mindful that virtual events and sessions like this can be sort of background or white noise, which I'm not inherently offended by, but I am always striving to make or to create an experience that is more active in participation. So I have two asks before we start. The first is I'm going to try to talk at you very little as long as you agree to ask good, interesting questions. And the other ask is if you're here, try to be with me. One of my theses in the book, and I write about this pretty extensively, is that I think the screen so much of I think our relationship with technology today is broken because of our relationship with the device. I think most people actually love the almost all the technology in their lives, and they just hate their addiction to the screen and the device itself. And so if you're here, just try to be with me. And the other reason I ask that, by the way, is I'm really sensitive. And so if I feel like people are drifting, even though I cannot see any of you, but if I think you're here with me, it just like makes me feel better, which I get to ask because I am standing at the podium, so to speak.
Zach, so we'll use our emojis. Everybody, you can practice all of your reactions, at least so we know that you're listening.
Sure, or in spirit, like some of this can just feel good. I'm actually one of my hot takes. Someone asked me for a hot take today. It was the managing partner of a $70 billion real estate fund, one of the largest real estate funds in the world. I said my very hot take, because I've been thinking about it more, is I do think we're like decades away from discovering a new plane of existence, like energy. And I'm not one of these, like I'm spiritual and I'm fairly religious, but it's so funny to me to think that we think we've like fully understood the physical world that we live in. And you can walk around and see someone and like know that they have been through a lot by the energy. And it some of it's the physiognomy, some of it's how they carry themselves. So just bring that energy with you because I can feel it. Okay, I waffled on this, but I'm going to show you something. I'm going to present something quickly, and then I'll duck out because I think it's worth presenting a little before I go into Q&A. And there's some like interesting ideas that I have that merit some visual aid. So I'll share those. Yeah, cool. All right. So I don't need to explain any of this, but it's worth, I think I should, so much of what I do today is to help the average person. So let's say your parents make sense of this moment. And not that your parents are average, your parents are special, amazing people, but But a lot of people are feeling exceptionally scared right now for all sorts of reasons, but not least of which is that they can't make sense of the moment. No one is speaking to them. And I really try to be the every business and the every man's AI guru. I wrote the book for my mom. I get on stage for again, to speak to mid-market companies around the world that are just trying to do a simple thing a little bit better. And one of the amazing things about this moment is how little people understand about how far we've come, how fast, on a couple different dimensions. And one of the reasons that this is true is that we dumbed the conversation to such a ridiculous degree. When we launched ChatGPT, I had 3 epiphanies that I'll tell you about in a second. But the first epiphany was that the conversation was about to get really stupid. And it sort of has. And that, I don't mean that like rudely, but if everyone keeps talking about AI as an app or a product, we're going to miss the whole point that we've built AI as infrastructure. And this clicked for me in 2024, when OpenAI's GPT-4o won the Math Olympiad, which is the test to measure how good a human is at pure mathematics. And it was at that point that I realized that after 100 years of conceptual, theoretical AI discussion, which is basically how long we've talked about AI since 1954, it finally had reached a practical performance that made it impossible to visually represent. Demos can't actually explain to anyone anymore how good the models are, because the models are way better than meets the eye. So when someone says, what are we doing? This is all I can say anymore. We're building machines that possess human intellectual equivalence and superiority. It's the only way I know to explain to anyone, be it my mom or Jamie Dimon, what these models are capable of, where we've come and where we're going. And it gives people a sense of how to anchor the pursuit of the technology. But that is not the best part. This is not the best part. The best part, even the model performance rate isn't the best part. This is breathtaking. In 2019, we could barely measure sentiment in a tweet. Today, we can do multi-step, multi-environment research. I mean, we're supporting novel sciences. And actually, it's so impressive that a Google researcher, one of what we call the Transformer 8, who contributed to the paper Attention is All You Need, wrote in a reinforcement learning paper recently in the credit section, above all else, we attribute our success to divine benevolence, which is basically another way of saying God is good. That's how impressed the researchers are by what we are building. And this, though, isn't the most impressive part. The most impressive part is this: the precipitous decline in inference costs. And I cannot stress enough how both impressive and surprising this is to everyone. More impressive and more surprising than how good the models have gotten is how cheap they have gotten on a per token basis. And it's quite something that we have achieved state-of-the-art technology that can run locally. I mean, I can run GPT 5.4 rather on my CPU, on my Mac Studio. And why should you care about this? Well, the reason that a college student should care about this isn't just that you get to see state-of-the-art technology, which is wild. I mean, 10 years ago, state-of-the-art technology was locked up for the enterprises. You got something that got, eventually trickled down to you. The best hardware, the best software. Best hardware was reserved for defense. That's still sort of true, but less so. The best software was reserved for the biggest enterprises. But now the best software lives with the user, students, young people, and any early adopters, because it's so inexpensive. The reason, though, you should care about this is if you look out into the world and you think about the problems you want to solve, consider that economically speaking, we basically measure human progress on 2 axes. How free are we to choose our own version of joy, each of us, that doesn't harm another person? And how inexpensive is it to pursue that joy? Those are the 2 axes on which we measure our economic progress as humans. And when you ask yourself, is my life better or worse than my great-grandparents? It's basically the only way to measure. And the way that we've made our lives so much less expensive, because we have, than our great-grandparents, or the pursuit of joy, is by making critical resources less expensive. And we did this with water, and we did this with foodstuffs, and we did this with electricity, and we did this with the internet. And now, sorry, my cat's here and he's very loud. And now we're doing this with AI. And in those cases, it took thousands of years or hundreds of years. And in AI's case, it's taken 5 years. And it's really amazing to consider that the Chinese economic miracle and the Indian economic miracle, which saw literally billions of people pulled out of poverty, food security, water security, are a result of like a few foundational technologies, desalinization among them. And AI at this precipitous decline in cost is going to unlock a bunch of new economic possibility. Now, this accrues value mostly to good actors, but it does accrue value to bad actors, which people are talking about now. Cybersecurity as a hot topic is going to become more and more. But it's the best evidence that I have for any young person that something very good is happening. But beyond everything else, the cheaper we make critical resources, the better the world gets economically. And then it becomes a spiritual pursuit, which I can talk about in a little bit. So then the question is, where are we going? And I'm going to say a couple things and then I'll go to Q&A. But let me just tell you about the integration phases of this technology. And the first phase is the one we're in, the enhanced application phase. I'll tell you a fun story. When we launched ChatGPT on November 30th, 2022, we did it as a response to a problem that I particularly was facing. I was sitting around watching OpenAI's revenue tick up from like every month about 1 million more. It wasn't good. And I was like, man, GPT 3.5, our state-of-the-art model, which had come out in May that year, was amazing. And I was like, why is everyone not using this? So we went into this room, literally, and we were like, all right, well, how could we create an experience that would allow everyone to see how good GPT 3.5 is? And we came out of the room, you guessed it, with ChatGPT, which was trained on a model that had been publicly available for 7 months in the API. So my second epiphany from ChatGPT is that the research and the underlying technology is never going to be the thing. It's going to be the application layer. It's going to be how you present the technology. And all of you can remember this as you go out into the world and build things, which is you can have the world's best underlying research, but you have to present it in a way that actually changes behavior that people want. And in the enhanced application phase, deeply taught me this. I really deeply understood why this was so important, why the most incredible technology that we'd ever observed had to be presented in a magic AOL instant messenger in order for people to get it. It's because the more things change, the more they stay the same. You have to comport the world to how people work. What it introduces is the second phase, the phase we're entering, the autonomous agent phase. And agentic AI has officially entered its teen sex phase, which is to say everyone is talking about it, but it's not clear who is doing it. And it turns out very few. Some people, of course, are doing it a ton. And what's amazing about the agentic AI chapter is that it presents all sorts of paradigm shifts. A lot of them are being discussed, but 2 of them are not. And as models start to do more things for us, there are 2 things that are going to happen that I want to tell you about that they're going to become obvious pretty soon, but you can tell people maybe where you heard them first, because I'm just shocked that this isn't being discussed more. The first is we are going to rewrite the fabric of the internet. When we built the internet, we discovered it and originally optimized it as a library. And we were like, okay, it was a bunch of Stanford researchers actually who were like, you know what we should do? We should put all of our research papers here, and then we'll add more researchers. And then for a little while, everyone on Earth, the smartest people on Earth, were just contributing their best ideas. And it was quite literally a library. And then one day, probably a marketer was walking by and saw these nerds huddled around their computers staring at their best practices. And they were like, the optimal state of this internet is not a library, it's a shopping mall. And we built the browsable HTML internet. It was, by the way, the first corruption of the internet. The second, of course, being social media. But the first corruption of the internet is a Faustian bargain that we would make 10 times out of 10, over and over again. We exchanged trillions we exchanged an information panacea of best practices for trillions of billboards. And when you look at the internet this way, you realize that it really does kind of suck. And it doesn't suck because GDP is bad or e-commerce is bad or all the things that it offers are bad. It sucks because it's really hard to look at and really hard to navigate. Getting good at using the internet, it turns out, is just figuring out who's trying to trick you. It's getting good at figuring out how to route your attention from the highest bidder to the optimal source of information. And when you look at it this way, you discover something else, which I cannot look away from now. When I go to my bank's website, for example, I go there once a week or so with the intention of getting my account statement. And I get my account statement, I send it to my accountant. And every time I log into my bank's website, I'm served an ad for a credit card that I have owned for 13 years at a rate that I would never want to pay. Because every company has a fiduciary responsibility to sell everyone every good and service they offer every time they arrive. If you get within eyeshot of anything online, someone's going to sell you something. And when you see it this way, you imagine if the physical world were built like this. Like, imagine if we put billboards on everything, it would become so awful to look at. And I very, very much believe, I have exceptionally high conviction that most people on this call in the next 5 years will stop going to most websites. That sometimes very soon you will navigate to a website that you go to very regularly for the last time because there's nothing there for you. If an agent can go to your website and, or in this case, my bank, and get my account statement and send it to my accountant, I'm never going to go to my bank website again. There's nothing for me there. And when you look at the internet that way, you realize that the internet's future state is probably not an HTML browsable internet designed for our eyes. It's a TXT XML internet designed for our agents. And I would bet on this quite a bit, and have. And I think what's interesting about this is the companies that do well are going to be the companies that actually figure out that they are either high fidelity, experiential website, or that they need to create plumbing as fast as possible. That their marketing sites should in fact be designed for agents that are collecting and harvesting information and distributing it versus eyeballs that are trying to make sense of a web page. The second thing that happens is even crazier than that. And this is something that you all are going to experience just as you become well-paid consumers, which is, I think we're going to discover how many preferences most people actually have. When we started using the internet, we made among us about 40 purchase decisions a day. Today, the average consumer makes about 125. And to better understand how those purchases were made, followed people while I was writing the book through my local grocery store in Santa Barbara called Bristol Farms. And it's a very fancy grocery store, and I would walk with these people up and down the aisles. I didn't tell them what I was doing. And when we got out, I would ask them about 3 groceries they considered. About 50% of people considered at least one of these: water, tortilla chips, and toothpaste. And I'd ask them, how'd you pick the toothpaste? How'd you pick the tortilla chips? And they would say, it's my favorite. And then I would say, well, how many have you tried? And they would say, just that one. And everyone almost instantly realizes that they cannot possibly have a favorite toothpaste with any conviction, because how could you ever try the toothpaste to know what your favorite is? In fact, what most people are doing in a world where we have to make 125 purchase decisions a day is they are making a choice out of preservation for their computational power, either randomly or via inertia. Most purchase decisions we make, we don't actually care that much about, and we are forced to make, and as a result, make them using as little thought as possible. And when you think about it this way, you're presented with the realization that as soon as an agent says, do you want me to fill your grocery cart? A lot of people are going to go, yeah, that'd be great. For what it's worth, I care about Good Culture cottage cheese with fruit on the bottom, Coke Zero, and white cheddar popcorn by Smart Food. That's it. Everything else, make it healthy, I guess. Buy local. What about planning you a dinner date? Yeah, that'd be great. Adley and I haven't been out in a while. We Indian ideally, but something romantic. Cool. What about a vacation? That'd be great. Sunny, direct flights only. Do you have a preference in airline? United, but willing to save money. And when I started doing this work, I realized actually that it extended well beyond purchase decisions. And then I started writing about this theory of the automation boundary. And the automation boundary is a question that I ask everyone, which is, if you could automate everything in your life, where would you stop? And it does start to tease this idea of what does it mean to be human, truly, and what does one human have that differs from another? And in the end, it's mostly preferences. It's mostly taste. What is it that you really want to do? What is it that you feel really strongly about versus not? And when I ask this question, a lot of people talk about running on the beach or tucking their kid into bed, or the answers get crude quickly. There are some things we all agree that we just shouldn't automate. But other people talk about chores, like doing the dishes or laundry. And it's like, well, that's interesting because these are things that a lot of people actively try to make enough money so they can pay someone else to do, or have kids so that their kids can do it. And it very much gets sort of fascinating and philosophical quickly, which is, what does it actually mean to have taste? And what does it mean to identify what it is in your life that actually matters? And this is going to be super important for companies, on the other hand, because a lot of companies think that they have very strong brand preference. And a lot of consumer businesses are going to wake up and realize, as soon as they're disintermediated from the customer and their preferences are outsourced, that in fact they sit very low on the brand preference stack, that a lot of people are not willing to intervene when an agent says this is not the best product or not the best price. And a lot of companies are going to have a very rude awakening. And the last thing that happens, and this is where I'll end, is I think we're going to arrive at a natural language operating system. And the natural language operating system is the best way I can describe a future where two things happen. The screen becomes less critical to work. And so we actually redesign personal compute to not be something you have to actively engage in, but rather that can take advantage of voice and telemetry data. Wearables will replace carryables, watches, rings, glasses, pens, etc. Headphones will replace cell phones and laptops. I also have a hot take, maybe not hot, but I think that screen time is going to be a negative status symbol in the next 5 years. People who are on the screen a lot, who have to push a lot of buttons, ditch digger might give way to button pusher, so to speak. I thought about that a little bit. But the other thing I think that happens is we're going to enter a world where computers and machines no longer require learning, like from the user. There's this understanding today that you have to learn a bunch about software or hardware in order to use it. I think those days are almost over, which thank God, because we make fun of our parents for barely understanding how to use devices, but we will be old one day. And a lot of people are left out of society and economy because the machines became too complicated. They didn't grow up using them. And we really want to make sure that machines integrate us and connect us, not separate us. And because of all this, I think that we're approaching my theory of unmetered intelligence, which is the basis for the book. And it's the very simple idea that at some point, intelligence will not be something that separates people the way it used to, or maybe at all. That competing on the basis of brilliance alone certainly will be impossible, both individually and collectively. And unmetered intelligence is not universal brilliance. So I'm not proposing that everyone is smart. In the same way that literacy does not mean that you will read, and that the internet does not mean that you will do research, unmetered intelligence does not mean that you will use intelligence. It means you will have access to it. And what you do with it, what we do with it collectively and individually, will define our outcomes. And then the last thing I say before I go to Q&A, and I say this to everyone, by the way, I have an Instagram because my publisher requires it. I don't like it. But I have a Substack and I write. And if you want to follow along, this is what I actually really like doing. I like medium and form content. You're welcome to follow along here. I'm also looking for a researcher. So if this speaks to anyone, please follow up with me afterwards. I'm looking for someone to write it with me and research it with me. I have a team, but I would love a college student. But I want to say something to all of you, which is today is the best day ever to be born, and tomorrow will be too. And if you're feeling anxious about the world, I have two challenges for you. The first is, we gave you cell phones at a very young age and we shouldn't have. And I am really sorry for that. am really sorry that you as a generation had to grow up addicted to the screen. It was not your fault. You didn't choose to do this. And we didn't really give you a choice to opt out either. And there's just going to be some repair that needs to happen. At the same, and as a result of being addicted to the device, you also know way too much. And that leads to a lot of cynicism and fatalism. A lot of young people believe the world is bad or getting worse. And it's not, but it's hard to, it's easy to understand why someone would think that, because you stare at the horrors of the world all day. So you have all this evidence that things are breaking without any of the perspective of how much better they are than they used to be, because we don't provide nuance. And what I would say to you is, you now have a burden, and the burden is that you know too much. We gave you unmetered information, the tragedy of unmetered information. Here's everything wrong with the world. Don't look away. Lock yourself in your room for 9 hours a day. Here you go. But you also now have the privilege and the honor of fixing it. And I would just say that you are going to do amazing things. You're going to go into the world and do things that I don't think anyone has yet fully appreciated. Someone on this call is going to contribute to the cure for a disease. Someone else is going to contribute to the discovery of some critical material or particle. And you're going to raise kids that go up in a world with even more opportunity. And that cycle is going to continue, I bet. And I think it's important that I say this, because I think the one trap here is fatalism. I think the trap is that we told you so much was breaking, and we didn't give you a chance to just be kids and to celebrate bark and to enjoy nature the way that children in a developed world should. And I desperately hope that you recapture the wonder that you had when you were much younger, before you knew that some things could go wrong, because you now will have the opportunity to make them better. And I think better in a way that we haven't yet really fully imagined. So I'm really excited to see all of you do that. I'll stop now. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk, I suppose.
Well, thank you. Zack, Belize has some questions. We have a bunch of questions, but before you start with that, can you just give us a little context? Let me see if I can pin myself. Maybe somebody else can pin me. Add pin. Can you remind us? You were a history major. We've had so many engineers come and talk, and so it's fascinating to hear your perspective as a history major. But can you tell us a little bit? And we haven't had anybody from OpenAI come and talk. Can you remind us a little bit about what happened when you graduated as a history major, and then how on earth you got into OpenAI?
Sure. So I played volleyball. I'll just tell actually, I went and spoke. This is so funny. When we launched the book, I spoke at my high school. I spoke at my high school and all the high schools in Santa Barbara and the junior high school. But I don't know if any of you have younger siblings, or if you have friends with younger siblings, go talk to a junior high school student these days. By the way, they are so smart. That's wild. They know way too much. But that blew my mind. That Q&A session was unbelievable. But my principal stood up on stage, introduced me with my transcript, and read aloud my transcript, which from high school, which wasn't very good. So I got it, sort of limped into Berkeley. I played volleyball in high school, and chose not to play D1 volleyball, and played on the men's club team at Berkeley, and was so glad I did, and had the most amazing experience. But wasn't proud of myself as a student, so I didn't have this image in my head of being a good student. So I studied history because I was like, I'm not a good student, and I shouldn't pretend I am. And then fell in love with it, and actually ended up doing really well, because I finally found something that I really wanted to study, which changed my trajectory in ways that I'll explain in a second. And I ended up taking courses at Haas in the business school, and I took courses in the computer science department, and discovered that I was a decent, I really liked some game theory courses I took, and I discovered I was really liked computer science theory, but I wasn't a very good programmer. I was bad at writing software. So when I graduated, I was like, okay, I should go work at a company building cool technology where I can sell it, because I understand it better than most salespeople. And I did enough of that math. And that led me to I had no intention of going to work at an AI company, but I had interest in working at a company that was doing something complex where I could like bring some value. Um, and so that's what led me to Crowdflower, which became Figure Eight. And it was, it won't get any flowers and it won't be remembered for much. We sold it for $500 million to Appen, but it was the first data labeling company. I mean, we built human powered data labeling at machine scale before anyone else did it. Founded by Lucas Buell and Chris Van Pelt, who went on to build Weights and Biases, which is a cult famous machine learning operations company. And they taught me everything I know about machine learning at the time. And then, did that long enough to go to Lilt, which was building large language models. But what made me successful was learning how to learn because I found something that I loved learning. I had always considered myself a good test taker, but never a good student. And then studying history, I was like, oh, I can be a good student if I'm studying something I'm really excited about. And it actually just gave me a renewed sense of, a newfound sense of confidence in my academic ability.
That's awesome. And that's how I think I actually met you because I thought you were the best networker I'd ever met. And I think I asked you to do the boot camp and talk about networking. So,
Hi.
did that help you to get to OpenAI? How did that happen?
I got a little lucky. It was a Sequoia connection. I think they probably didn't anticipate that Sam would hire me, or maybe they did. Lilt is a Sequoia company, and one of the partners, they were trying to figure out how to sell. They were planning the GPT-3 API, and one of the partners was Sam was like, "Do you know anyone who sold large language models?" And people were like, "What's that?" And Sam was like, "Oh, there's a guy who's done that." Because I'd been selling it for machine translation purposes. So
So that's what
that's
happened.
there just weren't many people. They're literally like the universe of people that qualified for that job is actually very narrow. And so I needed to be like, I needed to have humility, and I needed to be willing to take a cash pay cut and not manage a team. And I was like, yeah, I think I can, I'm willing to do that.
I like it. Belize has been waiting so patiently. I'm going to add you in so you can go ahead and ask your question or questions of Zach.
Yeah, I'm gonna try with my video off. So first of all, thank you so much. Let me know if you can hear me because you froze.
I
We
can hear
can.
you, Belize. Where are you? Are you on campus?
I am on campus. I'm just out because the internet connection was down at my house the day. But thank you so much for your time. This was one of the talks I could relate to the most. Earlier today, I was discussing AI regulation security with one of my friends studying public health. And I'm a data science major who will intern at an AI hallucination observability startup in SF this summer. So we have really different views on AI cautiousness. And as you said, AI has come to a level where now agents can act on behalf of you, like go into your email, etc. And at the same time, there's massive funding flowing into AI. So my question is, how much of this funding from your time in OpenAI do you think is invested towards the regulation and safety of AI? Do you think it is enough, or could more be done, and who is responsible?
Okay, great. So I'm going to start with the last part of the question because I think that actually is the most important. I mean, it's very loaded. There's a lot to say here, but I will do my best to answer it without being flippant, but also being mindful that like I could give a many week lecture series on just AI safety, and that's just what I know, let alone what should be discussed. The question that you asked at the end is actually the question that I think people should ask more about everything. And I wish that this was like more on everyone's minds when they talk about a major problem, which is who is responsible. So like, for example, when we talk about like cost of living, who is responsible? When we talk about like problems with a student's performance, who is responsible? And the answer is always lots. Like there are many responsible parties. Who it concerns, of course, is a different question. Historically speaking, novel technologies have proliferated very slowly, and they have proliferated because they're so expensive to create top down. So, good example, nuclear power, paid for by the US government, harnessed exclusively by the US government, weaponized, and then basically captured for the better part of 3 decades, then diffuses very slowly through private company, and then is basically made illegal in the 90s. A good example of a technology that sort of the power of which could be debated, but the control was never debated. Pharmaceutical drugs, super expensive, proliferates only through the pleasure and allowance of pharmaceutical companies. They spend hundreds of billions of dollars inventing a drug, and they say, we're going to price it at this price, and you're going to have the privilege of using it if you can afford that price. And what we get mad about is the price of drugs without acknowledging that the cost of creating that drug was so astronomical. The only way that people will create new drugs is if they can charge a bunch for it, especially for rare diseases. And this was true for basically forever. I mean, we've lived in this world where cutting edge novel research was always locked up. And you have companies like Bell Labs that have so much money, or Google Labs that have companies that have so much money, they try to invent new things for the purposes of building better infrastructure for their own companies. And most people never find out about those things until decades later. I mean, most of the things that Bell Labs created are just now showing up to people in the real world in 5G. And it's like amazing how slowly technology proliferated. And then AI. And the inference cost is the problem. It's both the opportunity and the problem. And this is what I remind people. It's a double-edged sword, because if inference is super expensive, then what you have is a few elites controlling state-of-the-art technology that no one else can have access to. And everyone goes, well, cool, so now what? But you don't have the debate of what are people going to do when everyone can use this technology. So you have this huge problem where, because the inference cost is so low, because the technology is diffused so quickly, everyone gets to use it now. And now we're seriously debating who should use it, how should they use it, and who should get to decide that. Historically, the government has been the arbiter. And that has had mediocre consequences, to say the least. Like, both, I should say, like very strange consequences, to say the least. But at the very least, it means that democracy, at least in the United States, has controlled the access to the technology. Now we are faced with a world where the technology companies are almost more powerful than the governments themselves, and certainly much smarter. And I don't want to politicize this, but we are presented with this when Anthropic was celebrated for telling the State Department how they could use their technology. And I want to remind everyone, that is so fucking wild. Like, setting aside what you believe about that moment, whether you believe Anthropic should or shouldn't have done it, whether you believe OpenAI should or shouldn't have capitulated, imagine Oppenheimer inventing the bomb and saying to the State Department and the Defense Department, you cannot use this unless I approve. Which is what Dario did. Dario was like, look, here are the terms in which you can use my technology. We've never been in this world before. We've never been in a world where the inventor of technology has actually had eminent domain over the government and the government's use of the technology itself. And it reminds me of this quote. Oppenheimer went and visited Truman in what year was it? Two or so years after he dropped the bomb. He was invited to the White House by a friend, and a friend brought him into the Oval Office. And he said to Truman, he said, "I've got blood on my hands. I don't sleep at night." Without missing a beat, Truman kicked him out of his office and said to his chief of staff, he said, "Never allow that cretin back in here. I dropped the bomb. He didn't." And it's this reminder that the hard decisions that are made aren't actually made by the private sector often. They're made by the people we elect to go to war or not to go to war, or to protect us or not to protect us. And this presents this huge sort of mess that we now find ourselves in, which is who should control the technology, who should have a kill switch, who should have the control. Forever, we liked the idea that government had the control. We liked the idea that a private sector, that Northrop Grumman couldn't decide who gets to get bombed with a Tomahawk missile, right? That was, now people are celebrating the fact that private sector can tell the government who we shouldn't attack and how we shouldn't do it. It presents this bigger issue, which is also who and how should we give access to the technology more broadly. This is a very long way of saying not enough will never be invested, and also too much will always be invested. This is going to be the most performative issue of our time, and we're not going to get it right, because how could you possibly get it right? AI, I'm actually amazed at how well it's gone so far. There hasn't been a Chernobyl moment yet. There will be a Chernobyl moment. There will be a moment. By the way, Vicky gives that face, but you know what I remind everyone? Chernobyl, the loss of life was like 500 lives. I mean, it was bad, but like on an economic basis, it's not that bad. What was bad about Chernobyl was that it changed the public perception of nuclear power. The reason Chernobyl is so bad is the same reason 3 Mile Island is so bad, is that it swung political favor from nuclear power away from nuclear power, and then we shut the whole thing down and burned trillions of tons of coal instead. So my ultimate argument here is that AI safety, as you've defined it, because there's a bunch more here. There's an alignment issue here. There's a bunch more. AI safety is as much a public perception problem as it is anything else. And the world gets physically safer all the time. The ROI on violence declines, primarily because we live in a very surveilled world. Beating someone up is very hard to get away with, and so on and so on. War is increasingly untenable. Our current president, the administration, is underwater on a popularity basis because of the current crisis, and yet safety online has never been sort of worse because agents are so capable. So my very on the marquee take is that we should normalize the discussion around the fact that people can do more. We should acknowledge that the owner of the responsibility is unclear, and we should celebrate people who do good, and we should punitively punish those who do bad. And I think my big argument is that the way you solve AI safety is not actually by saying who can do and not do what. It's by electing politicians that believe in the things you believe in. And it's by aggressively punishing those who use the technology to tear at fabric of society. Deepfake porn. I got called on a case of a high school boy who created it about his classmate. And my encouragement was write a new book and throw it at him. Cyberbullying at scale. Financial crime against senior citizens. These should all be like new degrees of punishment, so that we terrify people from using this technology for bad, because the low resource bad actor is now the threat, and we should just acknowledge that, like, we are going to let a lot of people do a lot more.
Zack, thank you for that great answer. As you can tell, I'd be a terrible poker player. One thing that you all may have noticed is when Zack's talking, he talks about Oppenheimer. He talks about Truman. Truman's a past president. Oppenheimer kind of invented, I guess, the atomic bomb. He talks about Chernobyl, which was a nuclear disaster in Russia. He talks about 3 Mile Island, nuclear disaster in New York. All these things are things that you all could know about, but you have to read. Zack, I just don't know if everybody knows about them. How do you keep abreast of stuff? How do you have all this information?
Well, I'm 39 years old, so some of this is. I do think. Okay, in fairness, I was blessed by millennials. had a psychologically charming childhood. I still maintain that like it's never been a better time to be born. Like I just am so envious of people whose lives are ahead of them. You know, I have a friend who's quite wealthy who talks about time billionaire, this idea that like he meets young people and he's like, you have so much more than I have because you have all this time to do all these things, which really is the resource you cannot get more of. And I was never addicted to social media. And so instead of doom scrolling, I read. I mean, I was a pretty weird kid. My glow up came much later, but I do think there's an opportunity to learn a lot about stuff if you want to. You just gotta look for it.
Thanks. We have questions from John.
By the way, if anyone's inclined to history on this, hardcore history is so good. It's the best. There are two history podcasts that I listen to anymore. I basically stopped listening to podcasts. One is The Dollop. It's so fun. These guys are hilarious, and it's really cool. And the other is Hardcore History. If you really like going deep on things, and you can glean a lot of similarities to the current events. Sorry.
Hopefully I'm spelling Dollop right. Hardcore history.
Hardcore.
Sanjana, I know you have a question. I'm going to bring you in and pin you as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Zach. Thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciated hearing your perspective on things, and your interest in history definitely comes through and is helpful for the way that you frame your points and conveying your opinions about things. So I really appreciated that. My question is, there was a few things you said that made me think a little bit harder about the trueness of those or like the complexity of those statements. You said one time you said that the cheaper we make critical resources, the better it is for the world. But like a lot of things, I wonder whether the cheapness of a resource, like what consequences that come with. Our eggs are cheap not because of the actual value of the eggs, but because of government subsidies. Like our meat, dairy, eggs, like they're far more expensive than what we're paying for. And there's a hidden cost and consequence to that. And there's a lot of resources that go into the production of technology like this, like minerals, like cobalt, lithium, that go into production of chips, relying from extraction in places like the DRC, or manufacturing labor in Southeast Asia that's economically like forced to be cheap through pressures. And like these ideas about like food and water becoming more accessible, all these things, like abundance happening. I also question whether how true that is. Hunger in Sub-Saharan Africa has risen by 30% in the past 3 years. It's actually, hunger is on the rise, actually, not because of a lack of food, but because of global pressures to export rubber and other cash crops rather than grow food for them in their own country. So I wonder, like, how much, like, are these AI companies seriously thinking about like who is actually absorbing the true cost? Like, where is this true cost? Like, what does a cheaper product actually mean?
All right. Well, there's a lot here, and I will give it everything I got, but I also acknowledge I want to acknowledge two things. One, I don't want to disabuse, I don't want to defend injustice. So I'm not here to like, I'm not going to try to defend injustice. I also think the thoughtfulness of your question rings true. It's clear it's a good faith question, but I also am not going to give an answer. I don't think there's any way that I could produce an answer that would satisfy you based on how you framed the question.
Yeah, and
think,
let me, sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
I don't mean to be antagonistic. I
I
am not
don't
very
hear it at
super
all.
familiar. I just
Yeah,
like want to know your perspective on things, and I'm just someone who is questioning things and doesn't have enough knowledge about any field to come to my own consensus about
I
anything.
do not hear anything antagonistic in your voice. Everything I heard about that question was good faith. I don't think questions like this are so like are worth sitting down to talk about, but I will do my best. The framing of the question you asked, I do want to correct though. I actually am very careful to say this. The world gets better economically when we decrease the costs of goods and services, and when we decrease the cost of critical resources. So I don't know what makes a good world. I actually like, I think about this all the time. In the book, I make the argument of a happiness function, which is like, how do you create a world where more people can have a better chance of achieving their happiness function? That's sort of my idea of a good world. And then like someone will chime in and be like, well, what about the planetary concerns? And I'm like, yeah, fair, like totally reasonable. There's a philosopher who basically argues that you should weigh a future population's interest as much as the current, which means that like every generation should constantly be making sacrifice for the next, which we don't, well, we do, we actually do, but we don't do actively. We do it in sort of other ways. But it's very hard to argue that like the world does not get better economically when you make critical resources less expensive. Like I actually don't think that's a very challenging position. If you consider that the way we made books, the way we increased literacy was by making books and print less expensive. The way we increase the Indian and the Chinese economic miracle are the result of desalinization and the internet and the declining cost of electricity. And every Indian has this very healthy relationship with technology because they not every, but most Indians see technology as this chance to bring themselves out of the position they were in previously because of how quickly the country industrialized and pulled people out of poverty, built a middle class. It is also true that there's still injustice. And so what's hard for me in this moment is to say like, well, which I have to, frankly, if I'm going to make this argument, the world is getting better all the time for most people, which it is. It actually is. We are like sort of on a pretty consistent basis. I mean, any given day, it's hard to measure, but on the whole, you can't pick a day that you'd rather be born than today. I mean, it is very hard to argue. I mean, you can pick a few years ago if you really think the world is shit, but it takes a lot of self-centeredness to be like, this is the best the world will ever be. It will never get better. And if you were a random person born anywhere on Earth in a prior century, your life expectancy was like 25. The average man until 1850, the average man buried a wife, and the average mother buried a child. You just like the world was fucked up, and in ways that like we don't really appreciate because it's almost impossible to imagine how much we have and how much most people have. My other issue with this debate is that we don't actively talk about trade-offs anymore. And like, I'm not here to moralize any one choice, and I actually am willing to frame it this way. But like, I'll meet vegans. By the way, I support veganism. I'm not here to fully support veganism. Number one consumer of water in California is almonds, and I do not eat almonds for this reason. I'm like, if we all just stopped eating almonds, we save a lot of water in California. But vegans are like, yeah, we should stop eating meat. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. And then they're like, well, and we should stop industrializing farming. And I'm like, well, that is problematic, because if you deindustrialize farming, you plunge the world into food insecurity. Like, the reason that we industrialized farming is the same reason that we invented the Cheerio and subsidized corn, and is the same reason that we subsidized eggs. It's literally so that people could eat. Your point that the egg is artificially inexpensive is exactly the right one. Government stepped in and they were like, if we don't make this artificially inexpensive, people will continue to die. This is the history of food subsidies, is actually the history of government intervention to help their people not starve. Now, we've bastardized the subsidies. We've destroyed what subsidies actually stand for, because K Street has sunk their claws into big ag. But the reason that the Cheerio exists is so that a child can survive. Like, we should remember that the history of American agriculture is basically creating crops as cheaply as possible so that kids can get the nutrients they need to live. That is why we build, that's why we industrialize farming. so that you can feed tons of people. And the romantic idea that everyone can build sustainable farms doesn't work at the scale that our population has grown at. And so, by the way, now you can make the argument that Malthus made. Malthus was this economist who said if the world gets bigger than 4.5 billion people, it will implode, it will crash on itself. This is why China passed the one-child policy. This is why India passed a one-child policy. And you can, again, I'm not going to moralize these things. You could say we should have fewer people, but as long as you're going to believe that we should, and you might, like some people make this argument on a moral basis, but as long as you're going to believe that the people should continue to be able to have as many kids as they want, then you have to recognize that industrial farming is the way that we actually will allow people not to starve. And if your goal is like, to help children not starve, then you got to celebrate that. Now, as for other resources, there is, and I'm not going to go any further than saying this, a collective belief that technology, and held by the companies that build technology, will serve the greater good in a short, medium, and long term. And that's basically been true for most technologies, largely, except like recent examples like social media. Most new technologies end up serving a greater good. And we all love antibiotics, and we all love planes, trains, and automobiles, and the internet and electricity. And there are some modern technologies that have been really bad, some chemicals like DDT, some technologies like social media, etc. But the people building these things do operate generally in the ends justify the means. And in this case, if the means are resource extraction, then there's not really a whole lot of thought paid to it. I'll be quite frank. And I don't know any other way to say this except the following. I really wish that there was a way to fairly remunerate the countries whose resources were being extracted in the way that most industries are fairly remunerated. And I think that that's a policy problem and a government stability problem. Like, we don't actually get mad that Australia's resources are extracted because Perth has figured out how to distribute. Rio Tinto has made 300 millionaires in Perth, and Perth has distributed its resources exceptionally well. We don't bother too much about the mineral extraction in a lot of the United States because the resource value gets distributed somewhat reasonably to the people in the areas. What really bothers me is that there are places on Earth, Venezuela is a good one, where the resources that are being produced are not accruing value to most people because the governments are so corrupted and broken. And that, I think, is a separate issue than should we extract the resources. To be quite honest, like this is my take. I think we moralize the resource extraction when what we should actually be asking is, these are super valuable things that everyone clearly needs. What we should concern ourselves with is, like, how do we create stability in the regions such that the value of the resources can benefit the people helping extract them, versus should we extract them. I'll stop. I don't know. I've probably gone too far, but that's probably the best I can do.
Santana, I appreciate the question. And Zach, I also appreciate your starting to answer the question. I have 4 more people in line to ask questions, and we are getting to our end.
I'll stay longer if people, I'll stay longer.
Well, I will, we'll do an easy one. Rihanna, I'm going to ask you to come on if you don't mind. I think you have a fairly easy question. And Sanjana, thank you very much.
Sure. Sorry, I don't know why my camera was like blurry. Oh, there we go. Hi. Yeah, so thank you so much for speaking with us today. I really enjoyed your talk. I was wondering, what qualities do you typically look for in a student who, wants to work with you, with your team?
Agency, curiosity, humor. I value a sense of humor so much now. I think that, like, my young people who are really eager to build stuff. There's this funny Venn diagram. Young people who are really eager to build stuff, young people who are really curious and capable of learning how to build it. And that produces a lot of exceptional talent, and there's no arguing otherwise. But I am struck by the fact that the younger population does tend to take themselves very seriously. This is not an indictment on anyone, or any individual. And I am like, man, I do like having a good time. And when I was like 22, I was like, I think part of my value to the company was that I was like funny, and I was like a kid. I was, I just enjoyed life. So I think, yeah, there's like a zest for life. Maybe it's an optimism or hope, but I reduce it to just a sense of humor. Like, do I think you're funny, and do I like being around you? Because you can learn most of the tools if you have high agency and you believe in yourself and you're deeply curious and you can discover how to do things. The missing ingredient is, are you fun to be around?
Yeah, thank you.
By the way, that assumes morality, that assumes a good compass.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I personally love that. So
Great.
Rihanna has a good sense of humor. And now let's pull in Jazz. Thanks, Rihanna. Jazz, are you ready to ask?
Yes.
Ooh.
Hi, Zach. I was curious. My initial question was regarding safeguards, but we sort of hit on that already. One thing in your presentation that stood out to me was how you sort of discussed how the marketing landscape may change, especially in e-commerce, as we move towards, I guess, agentic capabilities. People aren't traveling to websites like you do for your bank statement. So, as someone pursuing a career in marketing, specifically in the B2B space, I was curious how you see that changing and what companies need to do to stay high on that brand relevance poll.
Okay. Super good question. B2B is a little different. You want me to answer specifically B2B?
Either works, honestly.
Okay. Well, most businesses don't purchase a ton of things. Well, traditional B2B, like B2 prosumer, lots of purchases. But if it's a really high consideration purchase that has to go through a bunch of approval processes, I think that purchase, that web experience is going to be, you know what? I don't actually think that's true. I think the B2B websites are probably mostly pointless pretty soon anyways. Like I go to a lot of websites and I'm like, this sucks, but it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, all it tells me is that you suck at building a website, but I'm not sure what that means anymore. It used to be a status symbol, then it wasn't. Now it is. It's like, what I want is like some piece of, I want to know who your people, I want to see your case studies. I want to know how you're describing yourself. What I really want, though, is for my agent to actually go and assess all of the landscape and like look at, check me. Jess, when you go to a B2B website and like it shows you, like, some really confident B2B companies will be like, here's a grid. Consumer companies do this all the time. Here's how we compare against these tools. Amazon does this. Amazon doesn't care what product you buy. They just want you to buy on Amazon. So they do this awful thing that retailers hate, where they're like, if you're considering this product, consider all these too. And they line up the product comparison chart. And they basically they show how all the products they offer compare, because they're like, who cares? Pick one. Confident businesses do this. Agents are going to do this. Agents are going to go to the website and talk to the salesperson or talk to the automated salesperson and collect all the information you want, the case study, all the InfoSec details, and then they're going to send them to you. And then they're going to be like, do you want me to try negotiating for you? And you're like, yeah. And they're going to be like, cool. And they're going to call the company, and that company's agent's going to pick up, and they're going to negotiate. And by the way, agentic negotiation is how you build a more perfect market. So what I would do is, if you were pursuing a career in B2B marketing, I would start talking about this, because you'll be early to the game. And I would start thinking about web experiences that optimize for this. What does a white label site that is optimized for an agent actually look like? And, a lot of people are calling this GEO or whatever the bullshit, but, building sites, building information pipelines that help, that make companies advantaged might be like, will be a massive niche. And like building a personal brand around that niche will be hugely successful for you.
Thank you so much.
The other thing you could do, Jazz, is events. The one other thing that will matter a ton in B2B marketing is event marketing, experiential marketing, and building like really high fidelity in-person experiences.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.
Vicky, you're muted.
Anybody have any idea what I might have been saying? Jazz, I said maybe next time you can run the webinar. I like that in terms of big events. Martin, are you ready to come in and ask a question?
Yes.
Thanks, Jazz.
Okay, great. Hi, Zach. Thank you for sharing such fresh perspectives on AI. So I think my question is also a bit similar, but in terms of in the future when human decisions are automated by AIs, and then who ends up making the most money? Is it the model providers, the agent layer, or the underlying data owners? And also, how would that shift or transform most of the business models we have today if all decisions are done by the AI agents? And will there emerge some sort of new AI agent business models?
Yes, there will emerge massive AI agent business models. I mean, we are so early in AI and we're very early in agentic negotiate, like building technology. I should start this, but like building a negotiator, a consumer negotiator that calls companies and negotiates on your behalf is going to be awesome. Like, or even building a thing where you like plug the problem in and it like takes this. There's a bunch here. There is an enormous internet still to be built where humans sort of relinquish a lot of the purchase decisions. The question of who makes money. So this goes back to my earlier point that I didn't mean to say flippantly. I don't think that the value obviously accrues to model manufacturers. I think that the value obviously accrues to application developers. I think the value obviously accrues to traditional industry that is going to be benefited by unmetered intelligence. And I think ultimately, in fact, I drafted a LinkedIn post that I might send, which reads the following way. I'll read it. I'll test it with you guys. You can tell me, people can tell me what they think. But I wrote it today. At the risk of sounding insensitive or pedantic, the future of work matters less than the future of living. And there are two premises of AI that need to arrive as fast as the disruption it will cause. The first premise is deflation. AI needs to deliver more than cheaper software. It needs to deliver cheaper housing, food, healthcare, energy, and education. Some of this is going to happen through technology and automation. The same automation, by the way, that everyone's terrified of automating our jobs is actually going to massively reduce the cost of living. And a lot of it's going to mean unwinding decades of policy, housing in particular, that has artificially inflated cost. Everything that can get less expensive because of technology does. The second is scientific discoveries. If AI accelerates progress in medicine, energy, and materials faster than it upends jobs, it's going to mean that people watch their mothers and fathers get cured of dementia at the same time that they lose their career trajectory. And that's a Faustian bargain that lots of people are going to make. And so when you ask, like, who gets wealthier on any relative basis, the average person, like if I told you, Martin, if I said to you, there's a billionaire out there. I mean, there are billionaires out there whose parents are dying of dementia, who are like, I would give all of my money, every single dollar, to cure my parents of dementia. And that's not enough because we don't know how to do it. And the cost of the dementia cure today is estimated at like $1 trillion if we knew what to do. So if someone has a cure for dementia that someone would have paid $1 billion for today, how, like, on any relative basis are we not much wealthier is actually my point. And I don't know how to say this without sounding insane. But if we actually drive these improvements, then the value should accrue everywhere. The alternative is one where we just keep seeing massive spend on Anthropic budget and a few shareholders make a ton of money, but no one else does. I don't know how that goes nowhere, and that bubble would burst almost instantly.
That is helpful. Barton, thank you for that question. I think we'll have one final question from not James Peace, although that's a great name. I think it's actually.
All right. Hi. Yeah, so my name's Karsten, and thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. My computer's about to die, so I'm actually taking the call from my buddy's phone. But
Nice.
yeah. So my question is, you mentioned earlier, people have access to intelligence. What do you do with it? And I was thinking about this, as you were talking, where it's like, if I was in college 10 years ago, I could learn how to use a ton of financial models, crafty accounting, and build a career off this. But the way you're talking about it seems like this is like not going to continue to be the paradigm. So it's like, my question is, as AI becomes increasingly powerful and prevalent, where do you see the human time input going with the companies that you're working with?
Okay, this is a great question, Karsten. I'm going to try to give you again, these are good questions that merit longer answers, and I'll do my best, but this is tough. The first thing I'll say is I think it's like really, it is very hard for me to take seriously anyone who tries to definitively predict the future of work, especially a future where work gets fully automated, because for a lot of reasons. One, we really struggle with backward humility. Like we really struggle to appreciate that all of us are descendants of people whose jobs were automated to our economic benefit. Like every single person on this call has an ancestor whose job was automated so that we could live a more charming life, a life without some disease, some hardship, something. And we don't worry about them. We don't pay them second mind. It doesn't matter to us because we get this. And actually, it turns out that we all wander the earth every day asking, when is this good or service going to be better, faster, cheaper, without realizing what we're asking is, when is a human going to be extricated from the manufacturing of this good or service? And when you realize in the process is everyone right now is pretty eager for most people's jobs to automate, just not their own. Right? We all want the longshoremen to automate so that we can get Prime same day, half off. Right? It's like when your Prime package gets delayed, I mean, even the bleeding hearts among us, even the most empathetic, when our shipment gets delayed, we're super annoyed. And it's like, that would not happen if there were drones. Like if you fully automate shipping, that doesn't happen. The longshoremen, by the way, went on strike in October and got 4-year stay of execution. 4 years. It is illegal to automate the longshoreman's job. I'll come back to that in a second. And we live a charmed life in large part because technology continues to automate a lot of the hardships that our great-grandparents had to endure. If we actually automate most work, something so profound will happen economically. I don't think we can fully appreciate it. And that may happen, but it won't happen for a while. Because the other thing that's true is inevitably new economies present new forms of labor and new forms of work in the way that you couldn't have described the internet to someone in 1960. You couldn't have described the billions of jobs that it would create. And this leads me to the other point, which is political protection. Lots of jobs are illegal to automate, which we celebrate. And then then I have the bad news of telling you how expensive it makes the world for everyone else. Right? The reason there are people on this call with glasses. The reason that your glasses are so expensive is because the ophthalmologists are a cartel. They literally lobby aggressively against your interest to make contacts and frames super expensive in ways that they just should not be. And all these companies are trying desperately to attack and go around them, these policies that protect the jobs. of the people who work in their stores. So my point in all this is like, I think that work is going to change a lot more than we expect over time and a lot less than we expect tomorrow. And you're going to have a really cool career if you optimize for outcome versus identity and title. And I think the mistake that a lot of people are making right now is they're fixated on the idea that their work shouldn't change because they went to school for it, versus fixated on the idea that their work could actually get a lot better. And that like the world is going to evolve in sort of profound ways. And I'll leave you with this quote because it sort of blew my mind when I read it in college. This is the most interesting academic paper I ever read in college, and it's framed on the wall across from me. This is how much this paper means to me. It's The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, which is written by John Maynard Keynes in 1930. In 1930, this guy wrote a paper, the father of modern macroeconomics, against the backdrop of abject despair, people literally dying in the streets of starvation, goes on this European lecture tour and then writes a paper in which he writes, and I quote, "I must now disembarrass myself to take flight into a future that I will not live to see, one in which humans may have solved the economic problem and be faced with something more profound." The father of modern macroeconomics is arguing that like at some point we will clothe, feed, care for, house everyone, and then humans will be faced with an even bigger challenge, which is finding our purpose. And I will argue to anyone who will listen, to you all and to anyone else, that the future battle that you will face is not economic, it's spiritual. Recapturing the soul and spirit of children who lost it to the device, recapturing the soul and spirit of senior citizens who have been thrown into retirement homes and given an iPad, recapturing the soul and spirit of people who have gave up on love. Like, these are not people who are starving. These are people who are lost and troubled in other ways. And I think this is actually the future battleground. Not to neglect all the other economic problems that the world faces, but I think we're going to continue to automate a lot. And I think my challenge to you is, my guess, Karsten, is you're going to have a great job. And my guess is you're going to find cool stuff to do, and you're going to build lots of stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure of it. What I am really curious to find out is how quickly we, rediscover God, quite frankly, and something much greater than what it is we thought we were finding in the screen, which obviously led us nowhere.
Mr. Zack Kass, you always surprise me by what you have to say, which I think is a great thing. Today's code word for everybody's feedback is net, which seems appropriate as a volleyball player, as a networker, and kind of you boil it down to the net. And what you said about finding spirituality is incredibly important and inspirational to us. I know people will have thoughts for you. I think I've shared your Zack at Zack Kass email. If you have questions for us, let us know. And fingers crossed, you'll find a great Cal person to do your research with.
I'd love that. Thanks so much for including me, Vicky. Thanks to everyone for spending the evening with me. I appreciate it a bunch, and for entertaining my weird ideas. And yeah, you're going to do awesome things. Keep building a better world. Keep pursuing something greater than yourself, and keep having hope. You don't lose that. It's your greatest asset as a young person. Thanks again. Thanks, Vicky. Thanks for everyone.
You've been awesome. Have a wonderful night. Our best to Frankie, and we're excited to hear more from you all.